Welcome back to the C-Space studio here at CES 2023. I am James Kotecki, joined by Mindshare North America CEO Amanda Richmond. Welcome to the C-Space studio.
Great to be here, James.
So what does Mindshare North America, what does that brand mean here at the beginning of 2023?
So Mindshare North America and around the world stands for good growth. And there couldn't be a better place to share that than at CES when it's all about how do we drive growth for our clients. But we also see it through the lens of driving good growth for our people and for the industry at large. And that means growth that's not only thinking short-term growth and around quarterly earnings and helping our clients grow in those windows, but long-term growth that's enduring and diversified and sustainable.
And so can you give us a kind of a snapshot of your place within the overall ecosystem here, the advertising ecosystem?
Exactly. So Mindshare is the largest media agency within Group M, which is one of the largest media networks.
Yes.
Within WPP, the largest media holding company.
Right.
So we sit on top of a lot of opportunity to look at how we can connect with customers, help our clients grow their business, understanding the context of technology and content and data, and the intersection of all of that happens right here at CES.
It sounds like a bit of a Russian doll organization, but how does that actually work in practice? Because you are the CEO, which implies a certain amount of autonomy in what you're doing, separate from the rest of it.
We think there's such opportunity in scale and connectivity across our sister agencies, particularly when you look at how complex marketing communications is these days, and to have those relationships to bring in the right level of expertise across WPP family and our Group M agencies as well, to make sure we're casting the right teams and talent for the client challenges. And so that gives us this access to have the Uber network, but still have the autonomy and the brand distinction of what we stand for to attract the right talent and make sure we're marrying to our clients' values too.
So good growth for your clients. Is there a specific kind of client, kind of industry, kind of business problem that you're most apt to solve?
Today it's all about how do you reconcile brand and demand and move from an era where those areas were sometimes separated, sometimes by client decisions, building performance units separate from brand building agencies, whether that's through in-housing or through their own design of having a portfolio of different marketing partners. Where we sit is to bring that together because we do see this full funnel opportunity of connecting the consumer experience with speed.
I want to break that down for folks because this goes all over CES. So the demand side is let's say Google AdWords, for example, like trying to get clicks right now, give me some leads in the door right now, I'm going to measure it, it's going to be hyper-targeted.
You got it. Think customer acquisition, fine-tuned, in the moment, always optimizing, always on.
And the brand building side is maybe a little bit more ephemeral. You still want to track it with as much data as possible, but it's about, for example, sponsoring things like the C-Space Studio, as our partner Salesforce have, things like that.
Exactly, it's building brand loyalty, awareness, consideration into then that demand generation side. But it's a longer view. And sometimes you have to take that investment, actually all the time, make that investment ahead of seeing that immediate performance and conversion.
How do you see those two getting tied together in an optimal way? What are some things that people, if they have them in different silos, need to understand to kind of weave those together?
The number one thing is to really understand your audience, understand who you're trying to reach, and that will start to inform then how do you start to reach them in ways that will inform their awareness and start to build some of those brand connections. We do that through ways of looking at some emotional signals as well, and then bringing that into understanding their behavior across channels and being able to measure against that as well, which gets to then how you convert to performance. And increasingly that also means all the way through commerce. And that's probably the interesting growth space for this year as well, more of the retail media networks, commerce investment, and plugging that all the way through.
I want to talk about retail media, but you did mention emotional signals. So just curiosity, what kind of emotional signals and how are you measuring that?
Exactly. So at Mindshare, actually one of our capabilities is an area we call the Neuro Lab, and it's the opportunity to actually—
Very futuristic.
Very futuristic, exactly. Neuro and lab bring it together, and it's about better understanding. And it's through some of those typical signals and goggles and testing mechanisms as well as research, but to start to see people's reaction, whether it's to the creative or the context, and have that help inform how we think more holistically about our audience.
So retail media, do you have a sense of a snapshot of that at the beginning of 2023, this idea of advertising that's reaching consumers at, in retail environments, sometimes that's in physical locations, sometimes that's on the web, in terms of when they're ready to buy something, it's an ad that is popping up next to that experience.
Yes, no, I think the snapshot is this, right? It's been up, up, up for the last few years. And it's been fascinating to see how the media dollars have really started to shift from some of that brand building media in other channels to the retail media networks where there's that measurement of performance. And that's what we're trying to do, is make sure we've got accountability in those retail media networks as well.
And I guess in some ways, maybe in retrospect, it seems kind of obvious, right? Instead of having to do all this complicated data measuring to figure out people's intent, it's like, no, they're on the page, they're ready to buy this thing. Obviously, they're interested in that kind of a product at that time. But it's obviously, far more complicated than that. What are the biggest challenges you see in retail media right now?
Right now, the fragmentation, right? So all of the different retail media networks may have the knowledge of within their own space. How can you control that, and how can you complement what's happening in store with advertising? But we want to see holistically, as people do shop across stores and across physical environments and online, and have a broader picture of what that flow is. So how we're supporting it is, how do we think about working with those retail media networks to better understand how they build out and define their audience segments, and where we can find them off of their brand channels as well.
Is there a client example you can share of a place where that works especially well?
It's all, honestly, a lot of it's in development, and it's understanding it kind of a brand at a time, and then scaling it up into that category and into that portfolio.
Yeah.
But you're starting to see more of that with all the major players, whether it's Kroger, Roundel, Walmart Connect, and certainly Amazon as well. All of them are being more open to sharing data and more thoughtful about how do you measure that action beyond just building awareness into their platform conversions.
Speaking of thoughtfulness, one thing that a lot of people here at CES are thoughtful of is the theme of CES, which is human security for all. This is a new theme that CES has this year. It's this idea around human security, meaning things like food security, economic security, health security, overall security for people. Is that a theme that kind of resonates with the work that you do?
Yes, as a good growth agency, for sure, Mindshare connects with that notion of human safety, human security. How can we do things through intentional media investment that helps society, not only drives brand building?
Yeah.
And so those opportunities like sustainability, where we've been focused on carbon calculators and developing a measurement framework that we can share across the industry, work around social media and the impact it's having, and how can we make sure we're not in toxic environments, or even research we've done recently around bodily autonomy, so we can understand more about how do we think about women and men's view of health and health access these days.
Any interesting data points come out of that bodily autonomy study?
Interesting, actually, was the men's perspective, right? And also very leaned into making sure that everyone has bodily rights, and making sure this isn't only a women's issue. No, this hits all of humanity, back to your human safety and security.
So it sounds like you have this kind of ethical lens on the work that you're doing. Are there times, and you don't have to get into the specifics here, but are there times when you're presented with ethical challenges of like, are there kind of like, it would be easy to turn this lever and get this result, but in the long term, that's not what we actually want to do? Great
question. Now, we do think performance and purpose can coexist. And when we have some of those challenges, it creates a great opportunity for a debate and discussion with clients to bring them in and to say, what are our choices here? And understanding where our values are and making sure we're articulating that before we're into the marketplace guides those decisions. Does it stand true to their values and what their objectives are?
Yeah. As an advertising professional, do you feel like you are immune to advertising in some way, or just view it differently? Because obviously you're also a consumer, you're out in the world, you're being bombarded with advertising all the time. You're in retail environments, you're getting this retail media yourself. Do you feel like you're always at work because you're always kind of thinking through it through that lens? How do you turn off that part of your brain?
That's such a great question, because yes, how can you not overanalyze the message, the placement, the context, what hits at the heart? And that's what advertising still can do so well, storytelling. It hits you at kind of an instinctual, emotional, heart level, and that actually can still move me to tears when it's great ads.
Is there a particularly memorable ad that really sticks with you? There's, for example, for me, sometimes I'll go back and I'll watch the old Air Jordan commercials on YouTube, and those Nike commercials, around the World Cup from, several years ago. Some of those sports commercials, obviously that's really good storytelling. Are there things like that for you that truly resonate?
That's great. So this is probably the most overused example in the history of advertising, but the Apple spot that really broke through the screen, and it was at that era too.
1984.
Of like, you got it, and I remember seeing that in Super Bowl at that year, and being a young girl, and also having that sense of empowerment too, and how that was cast, as well as the message it sent of change and innovation.
I think it's interesting that a lot of this idea around mission, certainly Steve Jobs and the agency that he was working with at that time certainly represented this idea that advertising can kind of have this higher purpose and tell this higher story. Is it your sense as a CEO that more and more people, younger people that you're hiring now, is that an increasing sentiment for people to kind of want that sense of storytelling and a higher story, a higher purpose?
Absolutely. I think people are attracted to our space, whether it's agency side, marketing side, and media. They see there's an opportunity to make a bigger impact, to craft the messages and story that get out to the world. And to do that in ways that might not only be working at the Ad Council and doing pro bono work, but also just seeing how can we make sure that we're replicating more diversity in the casting and supporting diverse suppliers as well and media partners and making sure that we're helping their businesses grow and invest more in the content that is meeting those needs of the underserved communities. So there can be purpose in our business, and I think that's finally getting the spotlight that it deserves.
Does good growth have a position on the metaverse? How do you think about the metaverse from that lens?
Exactly. We think about the metaverse from first, as with any marketing channel, trying to understand what is the purpose for a marketer to be there. Is there a way for marketers to add value in that experience? Is it just being present and making sure there's an awareness level? So understanding what's the role versus let's just jump to it to try and put the press release out there. It's got to be more than that.
Yeah. Last question. 2023 will be the year of blank.
Year of humanity. I think we're seeing this here at CES, right? More human connection, as much as we're seeing impressive executions around AI and what's happening. That in our future, certainly people still want to connect and have that heart and conversations, and not be too predictable.
Exactly, and thank you so much for connecting with us here in the C-Space studio. Amanda Richmond, Mindshare North America. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, James.
And thanks for watching. This is the C-Space studio sponsored by Salesforce. We're here at CES 2023 talking with marketing, media, branding leaders, and more great conversations are on the way. I'm James Kotecki. Keep it here. Hey, welcome back. You're in the C-Space studio here at CES 2023. I am James Kotecki, joined by Mike Welch, EVP and General Manager of Xandr, which is a Microsoft company. Welcome to the C-Space studio.
James. Thanks for having me.
So Xandr actually is interesting. We actually had someone from Xandr here in the C-Space studio several years ago at CES. A lot has changed since that time. You're now a Microsoft company, for example.
Right.
So what does Xandr mean? What does the brand mean in 2023?
Well, let me take it to maybe the Microsoft level, because Xandr's now been integrated and we're part of a full suite solution within Microsoft. And you talk about a lot of change. Microsoft has grown its advertising business quite a bit internationally. It's expanded into a lot of different markets, has a global footprint now. Made 2 acquisitions in the last couple of years. Promote IQ, which is a retail media company, Xandr, which is an ad technology company. So there's a lot of brand work, you use the term brand, a lot of brand work underway right now, so stay tuned for that. But what I'll tell you is what our value proposition is and what we've sort of been sharing with customers here in Las Vegas. And that is, we give marketers the ability to reach 1 billion audiences that are derived from usage of Microsoft products. Those billion people, those billion audiences have a high purchasing power, they have a higher engagement with advertising than we see from a normal consumer, and they have a higher willingness to make a purchase online, so it's a really strong value prop for a marketer.
So tell us about those full suite of products, just to remind everybody what's under the full scope of the Microsoft umbrella.
Yeah, so absolutely. So it kind of starts, think of it this way, it starts with the Windows operating system. And Windows has these billion users that come and engage with search and with shopping and with the Edge browser. That spins off a lot of first-party data that then gets activated across 4 pillars of the Microsoft advertising business. The first pillar is Microsoft Search Network. So there, think Bing. The Microsoft Search Network also powers AOL and Yahoo Search. So a lot of search intent data there. That search intent data then gets used to extend to find audiences in what we call the Microsoft Audience Network, which is a brand safe compilation of owned and operated Microsoft properties. So there, think Outlook, think MSN. Yeah. So you take the search intent data, extend those audiences, find them in Microsoft owned and operated properties. That's sort of our second pillar. Our third pillar is retail media, which came to us from the acquisition of Promote IQ, which was a purpose-built retail media company. I have not had a single meeting in Vegas this week that retail media didn't come up. It's a hot topic. We're right in the middle of that conversation.
Several times here in the C-Space studio as well.
Absolutely. And then the fourth pillar is Xandr. And so if you think about these billion audiences, we now can extend those audiences and find them across the open web through Xandr's buy-side and sell-side technology. So it's a really solid sort of 4-pillar solution that spans multiple formats as well. So there's no format we don't serve. We've got search, we've got retail media, we've got display, native, online, video inclusive of CTV. So it's come together very nicely over the last couple of years for Microsoft advertising.
There's obviously places, especially where probably most of the places where Xandr's playing, people may expect advertising to be. There's theoretically, I suppose, possibilities to put advertising in Microsoft products in places where people don't expect it. So do you have to make sure that you're always kind of walking that line of making sure that you're putting it in contextually appropriate places?
Yeah, I mean, look, Microsoft has made a big commitment to advertising, made some acquisitions, and so has made a big commitment to get into this space. But the consumer experience is ultimately what matters at Microsoft, and data governance as well. So you're right, we have to be very careful with where those ad experiences come, and we're very careful about that.
So what are you looking at here for 2023? What are the opportunities that you see ahead for the Xandr side and the Microsoft advertising side overall?
Yeah, so I would say really 3 priorities. One is to get to just nail this Netflix opportunity. So as you know, we were named Netflix exclusive partner for ad technology and sales, and have launched a product with them called Basic with Ads as of November the 1st, an ad-supported Netflix product. We're out of the gate really strong. The product has been flawless from launch, and now it's just about scaling that over the course of this year. So that's priority.
So when people go on Netflix, they get the ad tier. They may not know it, but they're interacting, or they're seeing ads that are supported by Microsoft technology.
That's right. Yeah. Microsoft's doing the ad serving. We do all the ad sales. Absolutely. Second priority really is to find the next Netflix. So we've built this capability now to provide these large content players with a technology solution on both the buy side and sell side, as well as ad serving. Now we just need to go find others. We can scale that globally, and that's a big opportunity for us. And then third, I mentioned, is really taking those billion audiences that I've mentioned before and extending them into Xandr's supply across the globe. Those 3 things are priorities, 1, 2, and 3 for us this year.
Were people surprised that Netflix went with Microsoft?
They were, and I can tell you, it was funny, we were in Cannes in June, and we were in the throes of the negotiation, and there was some breaking news that came, the press was speculating on the two winners that were going to sort of battle it out to see. And we were never named in any of that. And we're kind of all looking at each other like, well, I think we're still in it because we're doing exchanges of the contract, we're doing red lines back and forth, and lo and behold, a few weeks later, we found that we had won that business. So it was really exciting for us.
So what was it that enabled you to win that? Because, I mean, you talk about finding the next Netflix. In some ways, there is no next Netflix, right? Netflix is like an entity unto itself. It's a massive brand, it's a massive opportunity. So congratulations on that. But also, how did you pull it off?
Yeah, it really came down to, I think, three things, two in particular. One is we have a global ad tech footprint on both the buy side and the sell side of advertising. So we power a global DSP, we power a global SSP with an ad serving capability. Second is we have a global footprint for our sales force. So we're in all the markets that matter across the world, and that was something that I think set us apart from our competition. And thirdly, and probably to less of an extent, we don't have a competing product with Netflix. And so it wasn't as though we had our own video product that was going to compete with them, and so we were seen as agnostic there.
And how have you thought about that consumer experience, maybe partnering with Netflix to think about how did you think through what an ad-supported tier would look like on a platform that historically hasn't had them?
We wanted it to be very non-intrusive. We wanted to have a very light ad load. And we wanted to kind of get out of the gate with formats that were familiar to people, so 15 and 30-second advertising. I think over time you'll see different types of formats emerge that are even maybe less intrusive. But the biggest thing was light ad load and really tight frequency caps so that you're not bombarded with the same ad over and over and over again like you are with many other platforms.
So you said that launched at the beginning of November, so it's been a couple of months now, maybe not long enough to know the answer to this question, but will it eventually influence the creative side in terms of what kind of Netflix shows are created and how they're created? Now that there's advertising, are there interesting ways to integrate some of the things that are happening in the shows with the ads around them?
I think that, yes, but I think that's another area where Netflix is going to want to tread lightly. That's 100% their decision, frankly. We're not going to have a whole lot of influence there, but I do think there are opportunities to have branded content within the shows, and it's interesting because Netflix shows really have spurred, Queen's Gambit launched a massive re-interest in chess, for instance. Formula One has found renewed interest from that show. So they really do influence culture, and so there's certainly an opportunity there, and that's something that we're going to take the journey with them on.
You talked about the idea of trying to find the next Netflix. Does that mean another streaming service, or does that just mean another massive opportunity, and what kind of ways could that
It's really an opportunity for any company that wants to have an ad-supported model that doesn't feel like they want to make the investment either through building their own capability or acquiring capabilities. You need ad technology, you need buy-side tech, you need sell-side tech, and you need a sales force. If you don't want to make the investment on your own, we're a great option for you.
You previously worked at AT&T. What have you learned about how legacy brands can innovate? And I guess now, in a sense, Microsoft is a legacy brand. It's still a technology brand, not as old as AT&T, obviously. But how are you what have you learned about how to stay innovative at a time when new entrants come into the market all the time and try to eat your lunch?
Well, at the risk of maybe sounding pandering here, I'm going to use Netflix as an example. They have really stayed out ahead of trends. So if you think about it, they were one of the first direct-to-consumer brands out there with the DVD, exactly, mail to home DVD. And then as that business was sort of at its peak, arguably, they made the decision to sort of pivot to a streaming model. And they were sort of, they were chastised for it in many cases. It impacted their stock price initially. But that turned into an amazing decision. They invented streaming for the most part. And then they also went and invented the concept of binging, releasing full episodes, full seasons of shows, all at once. And now they sort of have a real chance to influence the ad-supported streaming model. So I would say what I've learned, whether that be at AT&T or at Microsoft, my short time there, certainly Netflix, you have to disrupt yourself. AT&T did a good job of doing that. We disrupted ourselves all the time, from legacy landlines moving into mobile, for instance. You have to do that. You can't stand still.
Does it ever get easier to disrupt yourself? I imagine it can feel very painful in the moment.
It's gut-wrenching, but you just
Is it a callus you build up, like I'm just going to know that I'm going to keep disrupting myself?
Yeah, and it's an old leader, an old boss once told me that he wanted to have leaders in the organization that had scar tissue. Because if you have scar tissue, you've been through the fires, you've been through it, and you're not scared to make disruptive types of changes. And so yeah, it's just one of those things you have to have the intestinal fortitude to do it, and make it fact-based, and then go with your gut, and you know, these companies I've worked for have made good decisions, good disruptive decisions.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some disruptive insight with us, Mike Welch of Microsoft. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much for watching. You're here with me in the C-Space studio at CES 2023. We are live and we are still going. More great conversations are on the way. Stay with me. Hey, welcome back. You're in the C-Space studio here at CES 2023. I'm James Kotecki, joined by Jeff Jury, Senior VP and General Manager, Connected Car Xperi. Welcome back to the C-Space studio. You joined us last year. We're glad to have you back.
Yes, glad to be here.
Before we talk about your brand specifically, I wonder if you can just kind of start with a macro level, just give us some context kind of about the mobility space in general. What's your kind of general sense snapshot about how people are moving around here as we enter 2023?
And so we're seeing quite a bit of this idea of, what's mobility mean in the future and what's really going to be different about it than the past.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, from a vehicle, looking at cars, looking at motor vehicles, we see a lot of personalization coming into play, where you're going to be looked at going into the car and saying, how do I make this vehicle more personalized for my experience? A lot of the trends in the past were how do you do ride shares and things like that.
Yeah.
But we actually think the personalization is where the future is. How do I make this experience just about me?
Is the personalization then still tied to a car that I own, you're saying?
I believe so. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be. You could say, bring your profile in, and we have technologies now, you identify the person and you bring their profile up. But typically cars are an extension of the individual. Most people buy a car based on their personality, less so than just what gets me from point A to point B. So I still think this idea of ownership and having your own personal space is still very important.
So tell me what Xperi is doing with Connected Car overall. Can you now give us the snapshot of the different kinds of products and technologies that you're working with?
Yeah, so we're looking at immersive entertainment in the vehicle, and that also includes safety. Because when we talk about creating a more immersive experience for the driver and the passengers, you also have to have a nod towards safety. How do you combine the two together? Because from our perspective, we've done a lot of research and we say, people love how they live in their home and they're comfortable in the office, but we have this third space, which is the car.
Yeah.
And how do you create a better, more immersive experience for everyone in the car?
So let's talk about that a little bit, because are you envisioning a world of driverless cars? Is that kind of a given to you, where we're all going to be in this pod together watching a movie or something like that, or does your vision not necessarily require that to happen?
Not quite. I believe full autonomy is pretty far off for the average car.
Yeah.
But you can have driver assistance that goes on. Now you're starting to see that in cars now. And as cars become more, I guess, safer with level 2, 3 autonomy, then the idea about what is the entertainment experience can increase. You can have a more immersive experience. So they go hand in hand, but we don't envision with our products that we get to full autonomy for quite a while.
And I imagine that the entertainment experience, when it comes to the driver, certainly can include immersive audio and things like this. But when you look at it visually, could that eventually, and maybe it is now, looking at things like augmented reality, where can you make driving more fun visually? Is that a good idea from a safety perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Like, how do you make it fun for the driver while maintaining safety?
Make it fun for it to be safe,
Right, that's right. Yeah, and I think you can see some augmented reality potentially coming in there, particularly with heads-up displays. Where we're focused right now is a step before that, which is video. A lot of people would say, we can't put video in the front seat of the front dash of a car, but actually you can. And there's ways to do it that it's clearly safe for obviously the passenger. There's also a way to do it for the driver, where if they look away for too long, maybe you shut down that video. But to us, the entertainment suite is not just about audio in the car, it's about audio and video.
Got it. And so is the video that you're envisioning something that the driver would occasionally glance at, or is it really about the person in the passenger seat in that case?
No, I think
primarily?
It's both.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe that you're going to have video in the car for the driver. You actually see it in some other countries today. Now, obviously, you have to take safety into account.
Yeah.
Because obviously, you can't have anyone wrecking. But at the same time, this idea of video is so powerful in the vehicle. I think you're going to see it for all the passengers and the driver.
Are we seeing content that is being custom created for this very particular environment? Especially, I can imagine, if I knew that my content was primarily being viewed by a couple who were driving somewhere, then I might create it with, for it to be, viewable by the passenger, but then also you don't have to be watching it, you can just listen to it and also understand it if you're occasionally glancing at it. Do we see custom content coming in just for this kind of experience?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think you will see that because it's a great application. And if you think of, like, if you watch a movie at home, you might not have 2 hours in the car, but that doesn't mean you might not be able to see a synopsis.
Right.
Or maybe it's just shorts that relate to that movie.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of if you can determine that the average couple was in a car for, let's say, 33 minutes, you can tailor the content to represent that experience that they have.
Do you have actually a number in mind of, there's X number of minutes that we want to be able to fill with video that people currently aren't doing that right now as they're driving around in their cars?
I wouldn't say a hard and fast number, but I would say that the average commute, if you think of it as an hour, and if you had a lot of content that was 45 minutes, 30 minutes, that probably suits a automotive environment better than say, let's do a 2-hour movie, you know, or a 6-hour miniseries.
Yeah. Do you see AI coming into play for what you're doing, especially as we look at things like generative content, things like ChatGPT, or things that could create visual content? Does that play into the kind of content that you might see in cars in the future?
I think AI plays into the audio content, and I think it can play into the video content. It's an interesting idea that it goes to this idea of personalization.
Yeah.
And as the car sort of learns what you like, it could be creating some additional content that really represents what you want to see or feel or experience in the vehicle. So it's definitely a trend that we'd be looking at.
So are your customers the manufacturers themselves? Do you ever sell directly to consumers to kind of upgrade their own vehicles after they buy them?
Now, we personally don't. We work through the car companies, but that concept is definitely one that the car industry is looking at. So we can put a platform, our independent media platform, in the car, and then the car company can decide how do they want to work with the consumer on accessing that, and how do you upgrade it, right? Because with over-the-air updates, sort of a lot of things are possible that weren't possible maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, you're talking a lot about personalization, and you're obviously looking at the hardware that goes into the car to enable this, so I assume you could support a lot of different possibilities here, but what are you hearing people talk about as far as advertising in these vehicles? So if you know someone is specifically in a vehicle, and you know some personal information about them, that might change the way that you're able to target them through ads.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, there's studies in the past about advertising, been out there on TV and radio for years, that if it's an ad that you're interested in, it's not really considered advertising, right? So I think the targeted idea of personalization and targeted advertisements are definitely going to play into the future.
Yeah. As we come out of the pandemic, and now here, you and I were at CES 2022, where now we're back at CES 2023, where there are more people, and it really feels like the full CES is back in full swing. But we're still kind of grappling with these uncertainties around how much people will be commuting, how many hours and days a week people will be actually working from home or working some kind of flexible hybrid environments. How does that data play into the way you see the future of mobility and the way that your technology is used?
And we started this conversation about mobility, and even if commutes are shortened, people are still traveling all over, particularly North America, big continent. Everyone's spread out. Everyone's driving everywhere. So, you know, I think the commute, while it changes, where it goes to hybrid, it doesn't alter the fact that we're a mobile society.
Yeah. Do you see any future where the car is enabling digital health technologies to come into play?
Absolutely. It's interesting. We don't have it productized yet, but in our R&D labs, we're able to look at heart rate. We're able to look at monitoring health. And this idea, and we did some studies.
These are sensors in my seat, for example, that are detecting.
Or in the dash.
Or in the
in the dash that can read the body temperature, thermals, things like that. And we've done some studies that show that particularly millennials that are open to this idea of, oh, I'm getting a health check while I'm sitting in the car, and I'm able to. The car is saying, hey, you're in good shape, or you know, maybe you're stressed. Hey, relax. You know, it could be something as basic as that. But this idea of the car also being able to do diagnostics, basic diagnostic, it's something that's definitely in the lab, and I think you're going to start seeing it come out pretty soon.
It's so interesting, this idea of a third place, and really the definition of a car and almost the mindset of what a car is really changing, especially as we talk about things like electrification, and we talk about the car as another room, a place to get your diagnostics, but even in the future as kind of a battery that you might be able to reverse it in times of a power outage, and now you can be powering your home with the car. What's your definition of a car right now? How do you think that's changing?
I do think the car is becoming, as it always has been, a sort of extension of yourself, as I mentioned before. And now it becomes even more of a functional device that you're using for entertainment. As you said, you might be using it to power other devices. You're using it potentially for health monitoring. So as you get into mobility and you look at total mobility and the fact that you can now have a car that is, let's say, an extension of you as a person, on both a entertainment and a safety and a health environment, health basis, it really takes, I guess, the definition of car out, and
Yeah.
it becomes something else.
What kind of car would be an extension of you as a person? What would be the setup if we got into that car?
Yeah, I think you'd see a lot of entertainment around things that I liked between little video clips and audio. And this idea you said about augmented reality, it might be something where I said, I'd like to see, when I'm driving somewhere, I'd like to see more information about some of the points along the way that I don't know about.
We didn't talk much about the UX and the way that this is actually all being controlled. Touchscreen primarily, is that how you see the future? Voice, where do you see this
I think
going?
it's a combination of touch and voice. One thing we have in our products is we have the largest collection of metadata for content in the world, and that plays very nicely into this idea that with the voice, you're going to be saying things to your car, and it's not just turn up the heat, or it might be, hey, play that movie that Tom Hanks was in the 1980s, and it brings up a list, and just say just the comedies, and that brings that up, and say, yeah, the ones where he had a girlfriend. And then it narrows it down.
Yeah.
So you're doing all this where it's voice, and you might be pushing some buttons, but I think voice becomes a large part of it.
Does the car also then become the most sophisticated computer that I have in my house? And is there a point at which maybe I just want to have devices that are somehow connected to that instead of having all the computing power on my device individually? I can actually draw a lot of compute power from what's sitting in my garage.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think you will see that. If you look at the dollars spent on investment in vehicles today, more and more of it is just the electronics.
Yep.
So I think in the future, what you're going to have is a supercomputer. You're sitting on a supercomputer, and what else can you use that supercomputer for? And that may be the most powerful device you ever own.
Yeah, gaming, for example.
Gaming, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Jeff Jury, there's so much to talk about, and we're so glad to have had you back, and we hope you come back again. Jeff Jury of Exbury, thank you so much for joining us here
Thank
today.
you.
And thank you so much for joining us. You're in the C-Space studio here at CES 2023. I'm James Kotecki. Keep it here. More conversations are just ahead.
it drove some market dynamics, but ultimately our hunch was people want to mint the thing that they love. Let's allow them to do that.
Interesting.
So that's sort of the organic side, and then on the enterprise side, I would say, point to what Fox is doing with Crapopolis, a new show by Dan Harmon coming out this year in 23, and it's all about a new type of fan experience, the ultimate fan pass. How do we get people emotionally invested into the show by way of a new type of engagement? And ultimately, a really cool outcome there was how do we get people to have some sort of game of skill, and the winner actually gets written into the show.
Okay.
And so it's just a new type of opportunity to bring that fan even closer to their favorite creators beyond just consumption of the actual media.
So when we talked about the idea of being able to choose the traits of your own NFT, that's interesting because when I think about an NFT, it's something that either, as you said, is random or that someone else has designed and then I'm kind of choosing to purchase. It's interesting, it's kind of continuing to stretch the definition of what this is or what this could be, because now this is something that I am designing myself, but then I'm also paying for. So how do you think through what the value still is in that case?
I think it was eye-opening for us, right? I think there's a huge boom in the NFT space and people rallied around scarcity, i.e. where rarity came into play. I've got the rarest token, therefore it's more valuable. And I think we were doing a disservice for folks who want to collect based on the love of the brand or the artist or the musician or whomever they want to collect this asset as almost a souvenir or something they can consume. And so that opened our eyes to that, is people want to collect the things that they love or remind them of a special moment in their life, not something they were randomly distributed because they might get rich randomly.
Yeah, so in a sense, were they thinking of it as kind of a collaboration between their own design and that artist?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And that's one of a few examples, but one of my favorites for sure.
What's your message here to folks at CES? What kind of conversations are you having here?
There's a wide spectrum, and there's the non-weird, pragmatic. There's a tectonic shift underway in terms of disruptive technology that's going to change the world, and I truly believe that. Web 2, as far as I'm concerned, is totally obsoleted today. If you get really what we call red-pilled in the space, I think it could get really weird and potentially chaotic. Part of that is just the age-old theory of Moore's Law and the acceleration of innovation and progress. And every cycle, that progress takes half as long to come to fruition. I think potentially a lot of people will be blindsided on how fast there is a new sort of order of things, especially in fintech, in self-sovereignty and asset ownership. That's not just JPEGs. It's your mortgage, your title, the land deeds, etc.
It's such an interesting time to have this conversation. I had a lot of conversations around crypto, blockchain, Web3, metaverse in 2022, a year ago.
Yep.
And since then, I think if you just look at the headlines and you look at the general public sentiment around people who are not red-pilled, who are maybe not in this space, but looking at it a little bit removed, they'll think, well, that whole thing totally collapsed, right? The value of NFTs plummeted, crypto's down, these different crypto companies collapsed, Bitcoin is way down, so I guess we can kind of move on to the next thing. Do you see that sentiment out there, and what's your reaction to it?
I do absolutely see that sentiment. I'm annoyed by it, partly because I feel like it's misappropriated by way of potential just misinformation. It's easy to look at a market go down and say, that's broken, it's done. I think it's really hard to stop an idea whose time has come and arrived. There is no putting this genie back in the bottle, partly because it's just a better mousetrap of what we're used to, okay? Like the idea that I can run programs across every person's cell phone in the world at scale and host no infrastructure as a technologist is just a super compelling idea, just around resiliency and uptime, and then permeate that out into like the core promise of what it is the deplatformization of assets, where the asset becomes the platform. It's not an object within somebody else's platform.
It's such a mind shift for a lot of folks, and you talked about a number of players potentially getting disrupted. I think you used the term run over. I talked to a number of people here in the C-Space studio. A lot of them are legacy brands. I'm sure many of them are trying to figure this stuff out. If you could ballpark it, let's say I've talked to 30 legacy brands here in the C-Space studio. How many of them and how quickly, in your estimation, will be, as you say, kind of run over by this in the next couple of years?
I don't know if they'll be run over, because what I've seen is they're almost all thinking about this, and not just thinking about it, investing heavily behind the scenes. So full circle, though the market is down, what we're seeing is an uptick in investment in the space, especially from things like R&D dollars and most specifically from the marketing organizations.
Yeah.
We feel like this is a huge unlock just from a new way to create a customer relationship, direct to customer, and getting rid of the filters and the platforms that's kind of standing in the way between you and a direct relationship.
Is it almost as if, now that the tide has gone out, we can actually take stock of what's real and what's still standing and kind of build from a stronger foundation?
I think so. I think every market that is emerging like this with a lot of hype ultimately needs a bubble to pop so people take stock, take a step back and say, where's the value here?
Yep.
It's not speculation. Where can I actually apply this and solve a problem or make somebody's life better or create a better relationship between me and my customers?
Are people, are most people going to need to understand this on a deep level? Are most average consumers and users going to need to make the kind of mental shifts that you're talking about? Or will this be packaged using terminology and technology that is already understood to where most people aren't talking about the phrase Web3 and it's kind of behind the scenes?
Yeah, two cohorts there. I think on the professional side, in every division of an organization, I think you need to be cognizant of what it means in terms of how you deliver and execute. On the consumer side, I think most of the bulk of the work right now is around onboarding, actually abstracting it all away. Because it is sort of daunting. Like, oh, I need a wallet, I need to fund that wallet, how do I do that?
Right.
I'm clicking this button, what does this mean? Is this bad or is this good? So can we just totally streamline that? And Props has made great inroads in that regard, where we can allow folks to not only connect with their Gmail account or their Twitter account and get an arbitrary wallet, but allow the brand to pay the gas fees and the network fees on their behalf so they can just receive this value without really knowing they're working with blockchain.
Without the friction.
That's right.
What does the name props mean?
Well, kind of like this, like props.
Like mad
right?
props.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not talking about physical, like props in a movie or something.
No, I mean maybe. I mean, you talk about metaverse.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of where I was hoping to go. Yeah.
Who knows? Backstory on that. I bought that Twitter handle in like 2011 and just sat on it because I thought it was a really kind of catchy brand and was waiting to deploy it, and here we are.
So 2011, you had this brand idea. The metaverse, most of these concepts were not around yet. I believe Bitcoin started in January 2009, so very early then. What convinced you to make this mind shift? I assume there was at some point some leap, some shift that you had to make yourself. What was it for you?
It's a really good question. I got into Bitcoin circa 2012. Fancied myself a day trader with a full-time job, actually with your sponsor,
Salesforce.
for 15 years. A beautiful organization. Hello to everybody. And I was arbitrating the delta price of Bitcoin between Mt. Gox and Coinbase. I got caught in the Mt. Gox explosion, lost everything, but I was hooked at that point. Enter, circa 2017-ish and the advent of Ethereum, and I thought, wow, distributed compute, that changes everything we know about technology. The death of the server is upon us. We all become servers, right, in this new model. Everything is resilient, it's portable, it's composable. Other buzzwords, that is just sort of a better approach to exchanging value and information on the internet. It's the third wave of this, Web 3. Web 2 usurped Web 1, and Web 3 will usurp Web 2.
And how does generative AI play into this? For you, we talk about things like ChatGPT and visual creation of content from AI.
I am incredibly excited and also incredibly frightened by the implications of what we're seeing just in the last few weeks, specifically around ChatGPT. I think a lot of traditional roles within enterprise and organizations can be automated almost trivially. So the question becomes, how do we apply that in an equitable way? So that people can still retain their jobs or maybe apply it to create more value. But my fear is, does this sort of negate the value that the human brings? From the AI creative side, I think it's a tool, and I think it's an amazing one. Heard a colleague, John, on a panel earlier describe it really well, which is it allows folks who maybe don't have the creative skills to finally tell their story in a creative way by using this tool that really helps them sort of articulate the vision of what they're trying to show.
I wonder if there are also ways to tie the way that these things are trained with training data from a very wide group of people, and everybody who's in that training data set can somehow benefit from the economic value.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think value distribution is a huge unlock in terms of blockchain. We've dabbled in that with terms of on-the-fly top-line revenue being dispersed upon any creative that was involved in the creation of an asset, even if the consumer is the one that assembled it. So all the components on that jacket, there's patches, there's graphics, every single artist that created one, although you selected them, are incentivized and actually rewarded on that sale. And then on the royalty side, fanning out and distributing the residuals on those assets over time. So we think that's a huge unlock for entertainment, rewarding folks that had every single little nuance to do with a film or a television show being, and their estates long-term with a never-ending long tail, always receiving that value that assets continue to create over time.
Well, Bob Ullery of Props, thanks for sharing your mad props with us
Hey,
here in the
thank you.
C-Space
Appreciate
studio.
it.
And thank you so much for joining us here. We've got more great conversations on the way from the C-Space studio at CES 2023. I'm James Kotecki. Don't go anywhere. Hey, you're back in the C-Space studio here at CES 2023, and we are joined by Adrian Bashik, Vice President Ethernity, as it says right there on your hat. Welcome to the C-Space studio.
I'm trying to brand here at the conference.
That's right. This is all about branding, especially here in the C-Space studio, so we respect it. But can you tell us about your brand? Can you tell us what Ethernity is? If someone asks what your hat means here at CES, what do you tell them?
Yeah, we are a leading NFT. I'm going to start that again.
Yeah, go for it.
We're a leading NFT platform. We're a 360 platform that's specializing in all things digital assets, digital collectibles, and also moving into the gaming space as well. We have a token. We're on Coinbase, Binance, Huobi, OKX, you name it, everything but FTX, smartly so. And we have a huge community that's very supportive of everything Web3.
So do you work with brands who want to get into the NFT space and have no idea where to start?
Absolutely. We've worked with notable figures, rights, licenses, IPs, brands, car companies, everyone from Messi to the Dallas Cowboys to DeLorean to some very interesting entertainment IPs and properties coming into the space. We handle everything from the top on down, from curation to crypto to minting to wallets to sales and resales, etc.
And when someone comes to you and says, I want to get into this space for the first time, I don't know where to start, where do you start with them? How do you kind of get them into the right mindset to even understand what they're doing here?
Yeah, our team are longtime crypto and blockchain natives. And we understand that, you know, the Web3 movement that's kind of been born out of, you know, post-COVID 2020 ethos of really individuals over, you know, these big entities. And that's where we start in terms of powering individual creators to partner with brands, rights, licenses, IPs. So we bring in the top artists in the space to craft their sort of creative vision and then take things like loyalty programs, ticketing, experiences, even physical items and collectibles, and attach those to collections and drops and really activate these collections and drops in a very layered and tier-mannered sense to involve everybody top on down.
And does that require brands kind of giving up some measure of control and kind of thinking about this in a different way? I imagine there's one way of looking at it from a brand perspective, which is like a very cynical way, like this is just a new way for me to make some money or get in front of people that I have to do this because people are doing NFTs. And there's another way to do it, which is more philosophically aligned to the overall Web3 movement. Do you see both of those mindsets coming into this?
Yeah, I think everything was a cash grab very early on, and then the real players in the space are being determined and the real players that are here for the long term. Because we saw an explosion of entrants into the marketplace after they saw the rush of liquidity come in, which was always sort of foretold and foreseen in terms of the Bitcoin halving happens every 4 years. It happened in 2020, and it creates a major rush and run up in the market. Things then crash, go sideways, which is where we are now in the builder's market, and those sort of entrants that weren't in it for the long haul get washed out, and now the real players are determined. So brands early on in the 2020 craze, you know, it was a cash grab, and now they're seeing the long-term viability and true inclusiveness that they can have with their fans and engagement through all things Web3.
Is the definition of an NFT changing, maybe not from a technical perspective, but from the perception perspective of what a brand and a consumer expects from that?
100%. I like to say that Bitcoin disrupted money, Ethereum and the other blockchains disrupted software, NFTs are disrupting content. It started with art as 2D mimetic JPEG images because it was easy, and artists are the first to disrupt culture. And then there were 3D digital collectibles engaging fans. Now there's loyalty programs, rewards programs, look at Starbucks. And next it'll be gaming and in-game assets as NFTs. That's one of the big areas of growth for us at Ethernity, for example.
Can you give me some examples of what that actually looks like in the gaming space? If I own an NFT or I'm perusing an NFT catalog of gaming experiences, what am I actually looking at?
So we'll launch the game with our avatar PFP project called the Exorians, and then you can equip your avatar with the helmet, the mask, the spaceship, the guns, the boots, the fuel, the food, and use those as your in-game utility forever, trade it in-game, take it to other games once things are cross-chain interoperable, which the industry is moving towards, and it becomes a player-first, an individual-first experience rather than a money-making, you know, company-down approach.
And this is certainly an aspect, I think, of powering the metaverse as people understand it, the ability to take these assets from one realm to another, so that if I buy, I mean, in the physical world, this is a great example in Matthew Ball's book about the metaverse. Like if I'm wearing a certain kind of shoes and I go into another shoe store, those shoes don't automatically disappear, right? So we need this technology to be able to be porting these assets from one realm to another.
And it's so early on. I mean, look at the evolution of the internet. You know, these things move in 30-year cycles, and we're just in that, you know, last portion of the adoption of the internet age.
Yeah.
And we like to think that this new crypto, blockchain, Web3 age has just kicked off. And like I said, we've only experimented with art and collectibles. Now everything else is lining up to take form.
What are you most curious about then? Because there's obviously so much to learn and so much more experimentation to do.
I'm curious how people are going to use all these things. And I think fashion is a great you know, outlier, but also ground to see how these things are being used. And you see things like Artifact and Nike acquiring them, Adidas issuing their digital fashion collections and performing extremely well. So they're being used, and the more we can use them, especially with the advent of AR that's coming. I mean, if you go to the floor of CES at the conference hall at the Las Vegas Convention Center, there's a huge portion dedicated to AR, XR, haptics that are happening, and there you can really see and use these digital assets like never before.
Is there going to be a moment when you and I are having this conversation and we'll look back and say, okay, it arrived, that was the moment that we can kind of pinpoint as when it really finally caught on in a major way? I'm being very vague right now because this is a big question, but what do you think that moment, that kind of real coming out would look like?
I think when Apple releases their AR glasses, and you can, again, use these digital NFTs that Artifact released, that we released with Messi and his Argentina jersey that you can use as a wearable.
Yeah.
They win their World Cup, and you can, you know, get the brand new Argentina World Cup winning jersey there using AR glasses and more. That'll be a huge thing. And it's coming. We're releasing our app next month, for example. We have AR capabilities built in. It'll be through your phone first, but once those lenses integrations happen, it's game over.
You have a background in news, CNN, CNBC. I believe you host a program for CNBC about crypto, blockchain, Web3.
Yep.
Is that right?
Crypto trader.
And so how does that mindset impact the way that you do business and run this business?
I think trends, forecasting, and seeing and covering what's really going on the ground has given me and my team, of course, special insight to know when a trend is real, a trend is hitting, and when to jump in and capitalize and be part of that movement rather than just kind of see it from afar. And
that's really just based on your honed intuition over time. It's still that human intuition coming into play in this very high-tech world.
I like to think so.
Well, Adrian Bashik of Ethernity, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Much appreciated.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. There's another conversation from the C-Space studio here at CES 2023 coming your way right after this one. I'm James Kotecki. Don't go anywhere. Hey, welcome back. You're in the C-Space studio here at CES 2023. We are sponsored by Salesforce. We are thrilled to be here. My name is James Kotecki, and I'm joined by Shelly Salas, founder and CEO, Female Quotient. Welcome back to the C-Space studio.
I always love coming back and chatting with you.
We talked to you last year. I remember it well, but for those who didn't catch that conversation, can you quickly define what the Female Quotient is and what you're doing here at CES?
Female Quotient, we're in the business of equality, and it's all about changing the equation and closing the gender gap.
So how are you doing that?
We create spaces at big industry conferences to have conscious leaders come and talk about how we are going to create solutions for change. And you know, what's really remarkable is the World Economic Forum just came out with a report, and they said it'll take 132 years to close the gender gap. We can close it in 5. Why are we waiting so long?
When you say 5 years, is that a number that you've specifically chosen based on some kind of metrics or plan to kind of do that? Where 5 years come from?
I just think 5 years is a long enough period of time to accomplish enough and a short enough period of time to make things happen.
This is the Equality Lounge, right? This is the Equality Lounge here at CES and other spots. What are some of the programs and what kind of goes on in the Equality Lounge?
Well, first, it's a safe space for women to come and meet one another, and it's also a space to have real conscious conversations about what we're going to do, activations, actions, not just conversation, but what solutions are we going to come up with to really close the gaps. So every half an hour, there's really important conversations going on up there.
That's great. And what kind of solutions, because I think obviously CES is a place where people are talking about solutions. Many people here may have good intentions with their ideas to close the gender gap, but what practical solutions are kind of bubbling up in these conversations that you want to highlight here?
Well, you know, what's really interesting is when you think about the UN just talked about 2030, the future is female, and that, you know, all of these jobs will be filled with women. Well, these jobs are tech jobs.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to create the systemic, solutions for change, we're losing women to technology. Women are not entering technology fields. So one of the things that we're talking about is how do we create the programs to put women in tech?
Yeah.
And one of the solutions is all certifications for tech. Certifications, 7 weeks to 7 months, we can fill these jobs. So putting programs in place to make that happen, number one. Number two, when you look at venture capital, less than 2% of venture capital money goes to women, less than 1% to women of color.
Yep.
Well, that's ridiculous. So we need to change the equation once again. So we're talking about solutions around that. How do we invest in women in technology? So we had a lot of really important conversations around that. And we started showcasing unbelievable innovations that are all, run by women.
Yeah.
And we know that women are remarkable when they're running companies. They actually outperform companies run by men.
Yeah.
We have the business case.
It's the right thing to do. It's also right economically. It's right for the world to move forward with this. It's something that's so interesting because if you were hosting these interviews and you had these conversations with every single person that came through the C-Space studio, and everyone here at CES would probably talk the talk, right? And someone saying, yes, I support women, more women in the workplace, I want to get more women involved in tech. So certainly, I suppose from a consciousness raising perspective, or at least people are saying the right things, what is the gap between what people say and what they do? Is it because they secretly don't want to do it, or is there something even more structural happening here?
Well, I mean, there's always bias, but most importantly, we need the accountability and measurement for change. And I think one of the most important imperatives is we need the CEOs to take action. We need the person in charge to be accountable. And that's where we really need to elevate the conversation, the top level.
Has there historically been kind of a buck passing situation where, I can't do anything about it because there aren't graduates coming from STEM programs and therefore it's the school's fault, and it kind of people passing the buck around?
Well, I think we've put a lot of the responsibility on the DE&I level, but if we don't elevate that conversation to the up to the CEO level and hold the CEO responsible, things aren't happening. We've been going backwards, and we are really at a turning point right now. Especially women of color, they're leaving. Microaggressions are at an all-time high, and they've just finally decided, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Women in senior levels are all leaving. And so unless we are going to do something right now, we are at a moment where it is time to put our money where our mouth is. And we need to change the course, the trajectory of where we are.
Do you feel like we've gone backwards even in the year that we've talked, since you and I have chatted?
Absolutely. We are at a real inflection point, and we need to absolutely put our money where our mouth is and create the actions that we want to see.
Are there regulatory or legal changes that you would like to see in terms of requiring a certain number of women to be on the board or in the C-suite, things like that?
I don't think we need quotas. I actually think that we need to just put some new systems in place, and that we will. Caregiving is a big issue, and I think that we are losing a lot of women to care. Mental health is a big issue. We need to also enforce flexibility. We're sort of wishy-washy on what that means.
Right.
And so I think that there's a few things that we can do. Pay gap is still a big problem. Women are 80 cents on the dollar, black women 64 cents on the dollar, Hispanic women 53 cents on the dollar. Like, why?
You mentioned that you had before we started chatting here, you mentioned that you had a big walk around the CES floor with 350 women, I think it was. Tell me about what it means to walk the show floor with a group like that.
It really is quite remarkable. When I was at the opening keynote, and it was Lisa Su was the keynote speaker. She was quite remarkable, and it was an ocean of men. And so when we walked the floor with 350 women, of course we looked at some remarkable technology, but the most incredible thing was watching the faces of all the men as we walked the floor, and it was this wow factor. It was just so incredible, and you watched the faces of these men saying, "Where did all of you women come from?" And I coined the phrase "power of the pack." A woman alone has power. Collectively, we have impact. It was this whoosh moment. And some men just kind of look in awe of where did y'all come from, and then these other men, you saw them like cheering, like wow, and then some men just kind of bolted through the back, and it was quite remarkable. Looking at the big screens, the little screens, but for me, I always love watching the men's reactions.
So much of what needs to happen is at the systemic level, at the leadership level, and so you don't want to put everything on the level of the individual. But if you do offer advice, and I'm sure you do offer advice all the time to young women starting out in their careers right now, what kind of advice do you give to folks like that?
Go, be brave and bold, and don't look back. This is our moment to push forward, and I think that for CEOs and at every level, hire 3 so that you're not only and lonely. And I think this is how we change the equation and close the gap.
And 3, is that kind of psychologically kind of a magic number, a magic threshold somehow?
3 at every level, because a lot of people are hiring 30%, but when you're hiring 1 at every level, you're still alone.
Yeah.
So I think we need the representation. Representation's reflection, and that's how we can really move forward. Because when you put the numbers at the top, then we hire more at every level. Yeah. And I think that it's sticky.
Have you thought about the implications for the metaverse, VR, situations where people can appear in bodies and forms other than the one that they were born with? And what that changes about the dynamic in terms of gender. What do you think about that?
Listen, I think the metaverse is wonderful. And one of the things that we love about Web3 is because it's in its early days, it's giving us a real opportunity for equality. And that's why for us, we are encouraging women to get in early so that we can write the rules and be there first. And that is just so important. Web 2, we were behind. Web 3, we could get ahead and write the rules of the road. And it's such an opportunity for inclusivity. So we are very bullish on this, and we are really encouraging all of our women. We have the largest community of women in the workplace. We have over 1 million women in 100 countries. We are pushing, educating women to get in early, get in often, and not be afraid. And it is so early that it's not scary. Yeah. Everyone is learning. So let's all learn together.
Let's go. Shelley, I've asked this question to several people here in the C-Space studio, but because you are our last guest, it has special significance. CES, 2023 will be the year of blank. Fill in the blank.
2023 will be the year of adventure, the year of curiosity, the year of opportunity, the year of experimentation, and the year of equality.
Let's go. I really appreciate it. Shelley Zalis, thank you for rejoining us here in the C-Space studio of the Female Quotient. Thank you so much.
Let's go.
Let's go. And hey, thank you so much for watching us here in the C-Space studio, sponsored by Salesforce at CES 2023. This concludes the 2-day live stream of all 48 of the interviews that we have done with marketing, media, and branding leaders here in the C-Space studio. I have loved every minute of it. And I hope you've watched them all live, but just in case you haven't, they will eventually be available on demand, and you should be able to go back and watch those live streams as well on demand on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, whichever CES channel you prefer. I'd like to give Salesforce a special thank you for sponsoring this and making it possible here in the C-Space studio. Thank you to the crew at Kramer. Thanks to Juan for making sure the audio sounds good. Thank you for everyone else who put this on, and special thanks, of course, goes to the producers from the Consumer Technology Association itself who made this possible. Nicole Vidovich, our executive producer, additional production help from Mason Manuel, and others at the Consumer Technology Association. I hope I've thanked everyone and I haven't left anyone out. No one is frantically waving to me off camera that I missed anybody, so I'm going to assume that I did an okay job. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Keep it right here. Well, actually, I said keep it right here after the end of every other interview, but now I guess I better conclude it. You can catch me tomorrow, by the way, on the CES digital venue, but for now, I will conclude this broadcast of the C-Space studio. I'm James Kotecki. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you back in CES 2024.